Chodesh Tov and a Guten Erev Shabbos. Listen to this story within a story that comes from Rabbi Zevin. It's about the Apter Rav, Rabbi Heschel, who lived up until the first part of the 19th century. A woman once came with a shaila, with a ritual law question, to the Apter Rav. She had washed her laundry before Purim using potato starch, and now, a few weeks later, she wanted to know if she could use for Pesach the same room where the laundry had hung to dry. So the Apter Rav thought about her question, and he responded by saying, "Let me tell you a story, and I want you to listen very carefully." Here's the story he told. Once, in such and such a town, a Jew owned an inn which was frequented by many of the villagers, not an uncommon occurrence for that time in Jewish history in that part of the world. So a local clergyman, who was none too fond of the Jews, declared that any of the locals who frequented this tavern would not be allowed to enter his church. Of course, business fell off precipitously, and this poor Jew's livelihood suffered. At a certain point, the innkeeper asked the villagers why weren't they coming anymore. They weren't visiting his place anymore. What had he done to lose their business? They told him the reason. And so, in response, he said he himself would hear the confession of any of the peasants who wished to visit the tavern, and he would take their sins upon himself. The townspeople knew a bargain when they heard one, and they took advantage. So the next day, a man arrived at the inn and stood in the doorway. The innkeeper invited him in. The peasant said, "I want to confess because I've sinned." The innkeeper said, "Tell me, what's your sin?" He said, "I stole a rope." The innkeeper said, "So, give it back to its rightful owner." The man said, "I don't know who it belongs to." The innkeeper said, "So, give to charity whatever the value of the rope was, and your sin will be forgiven." The peasant said, "I have another sin." The innkeeper asked, "What is your other sin?" The man said, "I wanted to steal the rope, but 2 oxen were tied to it." The innkeeper said, "What did you do with the oxen?" The man said, "I killed them." The innkeeper said, "So, give the value of the oxen to charity, and your sin will be forgiven." The peasant continued. He said, "When I wanted to steal the oxen, I saw they were harnessed to a wagon, so I stole the wagon as well." "What did you do with the wagon?" "I broke it up, and I used it for firewood." "So in that case," said the innkeeper, "give to charity the value of the wagon you took, and your sin will be expiated." The peasant said, "But when I went to steal the wagon, I saw there was a child lying in it." And the innkeeper said, "What did you do with the child?" The peasant answered, "I killed him." At this point, the Apter Rav, who's telling the story, held his head in his hands and shook back and forth and said, "Killed! Killed!" And as he cried out, the woman listening to the story also cried out in bitter tears. At great length, she finally confessed her sin, that she had had an illegitimate child, and out of shame and embarrassment, she had killed the child. The Apter Rav first reproved her for coming so sanctimoniously and asking such seemingly pious questions about a room where starched laundry had been drying, instead of asking about what really needed to be asked. Then, since he saw that she truly regretted her actions, he taught her how to do proper teshuvah, and he put her on the right path. This story is connected with this week's Torah portion of Toldos through a commentary of Rashi, where the Torah mentions that Yitzchak loved Esau, ki tzayid befiv, because hunting was in his mouth, in the words of the Torah. Rashi explains this means that Esau knew enough to try to trap his father with words, asking questions, pious questions, like, do we take tithes from straw and from salt, and other such tales, constructed to make him seem much more concerned about spiritual matters than was the actual reality. However, both the story and the Rashi bring to mind the question, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? If you had been a kid in the States in the 1930s, you'd know the answer to that question, which is, only the shadow knows. Nevertheless, the question is a good question. Who knows what evil lurks? Frequently, when talking about twins, the twins Yaakov and Esav, or other pairs of brothers, or any set of such figures, where one is an obvious foil to the other, we follow this clear dichotomy to its logical conclusion. There are good guys, there are bad guys. Yitzchak is the good guy, Ishmael is the bad guy. Yaakov's the good guy, Esav's the bad guy. White turbans and black turbans, good and evil. We're on solid ground because the classical commentators follow this line of reasoning in many of their explanations. The description of the twins itself lends itself to this reading. Esav is ruddy and hairy, while Yaakov is by contrast not so. Esav is a man of the field. Yaakov prefers to dwell in tents, and according to the rabbis, study Torah. One classic explanation is that the two babies, representing ultimately two nations, struggling or grappling within their mother's womb, meant that whenever Rebecca would pass by a synagogue or a beis medrash, a house of study, Yaakov would struggle to get out because that's what he was drawn to. And passing by a place of idolatry or licentiousness, Esav would struggle to get out, as that's what's attracted him. Hold that thought for a minute. Others explain how Esav became the progenitor of Rome, or the Roman Empire, famous for its persecution of Yaakov's descendants. One of the unnamed commentaries Rabbi Nachshoni quotes suggests that the struggle in the womb was Esav's effort to prevent Yaakov from even being born. He was willing to forfeit his own life if he could just prevent Yaakov from coming into the world. That's a lot of imputing ill will, ill intention to a fetus. In other places, they're said to represent the struggle between materialism and spirituality, between wealth and wisdom, or idolatry and monotheism. Gur Aryeh, which is the Maharal's super commentary on Rashi's commentary, notes that when we read it out loud, Shnei goyim bevitneich, two nations are in Rivka's womb, the text actually says Shnei geyim, two proud people. It's a ksiv ukri. The Talmud says these refer to two descendants of the twins, Rabbi Judah the Prince, from one, and Antoninus, Roman emperor in the 2nd century, one of the 5 good emperors, from the other. Apparently, they had some things in common. They liked the same foods and had some other similar qualities, but of course, they lived very different lives. Rev Hirsch picks up on a very small, fine point in the text and finds great insight in the twins. The Torah says that when her term of pregnancy was full, Rivka gave birth, and behold, there were twins in her womb. Vayimleu yameha yeledes v'hinei samim bevitna. In the Torah, words can be written in a complete fashion or a defective fashion in the text. For example, with or without a vav. With the vav makes it a little bit easier to read, but we still recognize the word for its meaning. Here, the word for twins, te'omim, is written not only with one letter missing, but with 2 letter missings, a double deficiency. It should have an aleph at the beginning, the second letter, and a yud, second from last, as plurals do. Instead, it's written taf, vav, mem, mem, which we can still recognize as the words for twins, but chaser, chaser. It's doubly deficient. Rav Hirsch finds a clue here that their mother thought they might be fraternal twins and not look alike at all. The difference would be just in their constitution. However, this oddity in orthography suggests apparent similarity of appearance plus the expected dissimilarity that was predicted, which draws our attention to the fact that the germ of the future disparity between the two identical twins lay very deep below the surface, as indeed it does. But let's take that conversation in a different direction than we usually follow, which is usually talking about how our guy is good and the other guy is bad. Remember that the two nations, the two brothers, twins, the two nations as they are described, 2 babies, are within their mother's womb when the story opens. It unfolds as their births occur, and their lives take their courses, beginning with the mess of pottage, the lentil soup or cholent, that Yaakov sells Esav in exchange for his older brother's birthright. But we're introduced to them while they are both still grappling, still wrestling, struggling within their mother. Perhaps in this light, the common description of them representing the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, the positive inclination within a human being, and the negative inclination, the inclination towards not such productive things. Perhaps that description is more helpful, because these describe two warring or two struggling sides within all of us. It's always much easier to identify and label the villain as the other, somebody else, somewhere else, another nation, another person, another figure. But since the Torah is instruction for all of us at all times, perhaps we can get something very important out of it by appreciating that the struggle that's described here goes on within all of us, within each one of us. Sometimes we're drawn to prayer and study, like Yaakov was. Sometimes we're drawn to other pursuits, as we're told Esav was. That's a conflict that we all experience at one time or another, much less an external force acting upon us than our own internal drives, which sometimes find themselves in conflict, wanting two different, seemingly opposing things. Or so it seems. We can also look at the two figures as representing two modes of divine service. Sur Meira, V'asei Tov, as David HaMelech, King David writes in Tehillim, Kapitel Lamed Daled, Psalm 34. Turn from evil and do good, the psalm says. Seek peace and pursue it. One inclination is turning away from evil. Perhaps that's what Esav was doing when, still in utero, he passed by a house of idolatry. Maybe his drive was to smash evil, to eradicate it. So he struggled to get to that project of crushing opposition to the good. While Yaakov was drawn to study and prayer, the V'asei Tov, the do good side of the equation. Both had drives and the inclination just towards different parts of the project. If that's so, then the Bakesh Shalom V'rodfehu, the continuation of that verse in Psalms, seek peace and pursue it, is internal as much as external. We are, of course, supposed to seek peace in the world, and at the same time we're enjoined to seek inner peace, to mediate our inner conflicts, to redirect or reframe our drives and desires in such a way that they bring about peace, not conflict, of course with others, and just as importantly, or even more so, within ourselves. Ultimately, Yaakov and Esav are two biblical figures, two progenitors of great and proud nations, it's true, and they are also us. Maybe one way to navigate this struggle is to decide which we give priority, who has the upper hand. If we say the material comes first and then the spiritual, and I have to work and cut the grass and wash the car, and when I have time, maybe I'll study, maybe I'll daven a little bit, that is one statement of priorities. Another strategy is to say, I have priorities in Torah, in Tefillah, in Tzedakah, every day, every week, and whatever else needs to happen, I'll squeeze it in around that, somewhere, somehow. Or even more, to say that I will use my material success in the world to support my Jewish life, which is one way to set your compass. Another is to say, I'll use my spiritual navigation points to tell me what's good and what's worth pursuing. That's the direction I'll go, and anything that doesn't fit with that, I'll leave by the wayside. We just entered into the month of Kislev this week, and we are in the part of the year that has the most darkness. Nightfall is the earliest in the month of Kislev. The nights are the longest. A little bit of light pushes away much darkness. And that is what we celebrate and we live during Hanukkah, the festival of lights. This message is not just for 8 days in the winter, though, the 8 days that we're actually lighting candles, lighting a menorah. It's really lessons for life in all of our days, all year round, and all throughout our years, that our effort is to bring light wherever we go, illuminating the world no matter how dark it is, with goodness and godliness. May we all continue to find the strength and the inspiration to keep the lights illuminated and increasing. Good Shabbos, a guten Chodesh.